Thank you, everyone, for joining us for today's GSA Fleet Desktop Workshop on fast reporting. I'm going to turn things over to George Shabbat, Michelle Kirby, and Ron Stewart.
All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is George Shabbat. I'm the branch chief for vehicle management within GSA Fleet. Our team this year took back over the GSA Fleet fast reporting process, and something that I had worked on with Michelle and Ron almost 15 years ago. So it's kind of fun to get kind of launching the piece out of drive-through, and so kind of coming back to actually launch the leasing piece in gsafleet.gov. It's kind of fun to bring it back full circle. I've already seen the questions popping up about copies of the training slides. Stacy did mention that in her opener, but if you are interested in a copy of the training slides, please send an email to fleet.operations@gsa.gov. I think Stacy's going to put it in the Q&A. We also have the email address for our team, the fast support team, and other references at the end of the presentation. So we will, I'm sure, cover this again, but in case you're looking for the slides, you'll need to email us fleet.operations@gsafleet.gov if you want a copy. For anyone who is on the call, I see there's 240 participants right now, which is fantastic. If you do not know what the Federal Automotive Statistical Tool is, or FAST, the intention here is not to do kind of diving in from the very beginning. If you don't know what it is, then you probably have not been assigned it by your agency. So this may not be the training for you necessarily. If you are interested in learning more, we certainly encourage you to stick around and do so. But in the interest of time, and understanding that everybody's busy, if you don't know what it is, and that's not something that you're doing on a daily basis, there may be some better avenues and some better information that we can provide on kind of what it is and how it works. And let's see. So on the call today, we have a panel of people from GSA Fleet as well as Idaho National Laboratory. I'll introduce them in a second. Everybody's here to answer your questions. As Stacy mentioned, please do put those questions in the Q&A. We're going to try and answer as many of them live as we can. We're looking at this very much as a working session for you. The fast cycle did launch on October 1st. So everybody, hopefully, as Michelle would say, is already gotten started on this, not waiting till December 15th when the cycle closes. So understanding that people are probably knee-deep in this at this point, we're about ready to get started. This is really intended to be a working session. If you have questions, we want to try to answer them, even if we start going down some little rabbit holes. Some things we may have to take offline if they're really specific to your agency, in which we'll let you know that. But if it's something that we think has broad applicability to the general audience, we'll try and get those questions answered. There will be some questions that do get answered in the Q&A, as was also mentioned. So again, you may get your questions answered a couple of different ways, but there are also a bunch of resources available in the slide deck at the end. Feel free to reach out to any of the teams and any of the resources that are available for additional content. So again, real quick, George Shabbat, branch chief for vehicle management within GSA Fleet. Also on the line with us today from the GSA Fleet team, Carol Boros and Jonathan Henkes are going to be handling some of the Q&A questions. And then from the Idaho National Laboratory FAST team, we have Michelle Kirby, we have Ron Stewart, and I don't know if Tim's going to be on the line or not, but we do have a couple of folks there as well. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so here's kind of our goal for today. We've got some general updates, just kind of what do you really need to know about the fast cycle and where we are. Information about some additional reports that are being provided by GSA outside of the data you pull directly from our sites. We're going to go through a quick demo of how you access the reports on the GSA Fleet side, as well as some information from Michelle on accessing the sandbox for FAST, as well as the FAST system itself. We're going to talk a little bit about data validation updates. So some of the changes that have been made as we've migrated from the old system to the new system. Talk a little bit about data quality scores. I know there were a lot of questions about that from agency fleet managers when they got their scores back in the second quarter last year. And then we'll talk a little bit about customer-driven data and the ability to update information, how to approach that for FY24, as well as going forward to make sure your data is correct for FY25. All right, as I mentioned at the opener, so the FAST cycle, the Federal Automotive Statistical Reporting Cycle, did open on October 1st and closes on December 15th. So now is a great time to get started. For the first time this year, we are going to have, for both leasing and agency-owned customers that use GSAFleet.gov as a fleet management information system, both sides, leasing and purchasing, who use those systems, will be able to pull that information out of GSAFleet.gov. All of that data was made available on October 15th. It is a snapshot of information from September 30th of 2024. So that'll come back up as we're talking about a couple things, but just keep in mind, it's not a real-time dynamic view of what your fleet looks like today. It is a snapshot of what your fleet looked like on September 30th, 2024. For anybody who is used to pulling that data out of GSA Fleet drive-through, the GSA Fleet drive-through is shut down. That's not an option to pull the data this year. All of that information, whether you're pulling your previous, which is what you're doing right now, or when you get towards the August timeline and are looking for your future projections, all of that information will be available there. So again, 2 different sets of reports, previous year as well as the future. All of that information is in gsafleet.gov. In terms of the updates, one of the key things that we want to make sure is clear, and this gets back to that September 30th date, is if you notice that there are any data elements that need to be updated in your file, information that like ISO 141, domestic versus foreign, any of those data elements need to be updated in the file that you download from gsafleet.gov. We can make the updates, and we'll get into this if it's vehicle detail specific or customer driven data specific. You can make those updates in the system, but they will apply going forward. So towards your FY25 reporting, they will not impact the report that you pull for FY24. So again, just again, that rookie snapshot, whatever was there September 30th, we're working. I mean, if defects pop up, like we can work on certain elements like that. But if it's data that needs to be updated in there, you're going to have to update that information in the file that you download, in the spreadsheet that you download, before you upload it to the INL Fast Web website. And again, so I covered the customer driven data piece. Any changes that have been made there after October 1st will not impact that September 30th date. It will just impact the information going forward. So again, pull that data. It's your data to upload. And then we always get the question, like, why doesn't GSA Fleet just update the information for us? And part of the reason is that we don't have all of your information necessarily. We can't make a determination on things like indirect cost. We can't make a determination on whether or not you use the functional need versus an alternative exemption requirement. So the data that's there is yours. We provide the best information we have available. But again, the key element there, kind of harping back on this point, is that whatever was there September 30th is the locked in data. Again, if there's something specific, we can try and deal with defects and that kind of thing, but data that needs to be updated has to be done in that site. All right. 2 different reports were sent out to agency fleet managers by GSA Fleet's AFV team. So that's Stephanie Versolfi, Lisa Wheatley, Joe Marisola, that group of folks. So back on right around October 15th, the lump sum cost report was sent out to agency fleet managers. I think this really only applied to like 5 agencies. The electricity consumption reports actually were just sent out earlier this week. Both are separate spreadsheets. That information does need to be added to the GSA Fleet or to your FAST report before you upload it. It's not something that we were able to incorporate in. We're looking to add some additional functionality for next year, but it is stuff that needs to be added separately. This is a key element that the agency fleet manager is going to need to work with you on so that information doesn't get double counted. So they're going to be working with the INL team to make sure that it's like, hey, either we're applying this at the vehicle level or we need to add it after the fact. Make sure that you've got a coordinated approach between how it's being captured locally and at the headquarters level so that you don't end up with information being double counted. So again, the lump sum report went out, I believe, October 15th, 16th, and then the lump sum and the electricity consumption report just went out earlier this week. All right, so I see a question. Can someone repeat? We said would upload our data corrections once we download it from GSA Fleet. So once you download your data from GSA Fleet's website and make your corrections to that file, that information gets uploaded into the Fast Web website that the Idaho National Laboratory operates. And so Michelle and I are going to do a little demo here and show you how to download the information from our system. And then Michelle's going to show you the sandbox and then how to upload the information in that system. So hopefully that'll be made clear there. All right, so actually we can go ahead and actually dive into that right now. So pull this over. So for anybody who is not familiar, this is a gsafleet.gov website. I'm going to go ahead and log in as a GSA Fleet employee, but you would log in as a customer when you're accessing the site. The way that the information appears on the screen, again, for anybody who isn't familiar, can differ depending upon what your profile gives you access to. So I have more of a site administrator role, so there's functionality that I can see in here that you don't. So if you don't see something, it's because of what your role is. It's not because it's just somehow missing from your data. But for the purpose of everybody who's on the call, in terms of pulling a fast report, as long as you have a customer fleet manager access role or higher within your agency, you would have the ability to run the report to pull fast data. So what you would do, come over here to where it says Run Reports, select Vehicle Reports, and that will pull up the Vehicle Reports Manager. Within here, you have two different options, and they're be two separate reports. So it's not a combined report for agency-owned data as well as GSA lease data. You have to run it one time for each. So again, we don't have a combined version. If your agency does not use GSAFleet.gov as its fleet management information system, you either may not have access to the agency-owned report, or if you try to pull it, there won't be any data. Your agency's fleet management information system should have access to that. You'll be able to get access to that information through your agency, however that's set up for you. But again, if you're not registered and your fleet's not registered as a functioning fleet, as an operational fleet within GSAFleet.gov, with that as the fleet management information system, you would not see data for agency-owned. So again, whichever you're pulling, I'm going to pick GSA leased, choosing from available reports. So a bunch of different reports are available here. We're focusing on the fast report today. So choose from available reports, select fast report, hit next. All right. Your agency selection criteria is going to be limited by what your profile is. For example, Michelle, as a Department of Energy employee, could not log in here and all of a sudden just have access to Department of Army's data or to data that went beyond what her scoping level is. So I'm going to go ahead and select GSA. But you do have the options, agency code, bureau, and different elements. Again, still going to be limited based off of what your scoping is. Hit next. All right, so here you have your data selection criteria. So the previous year report is the one that we are focusing on right now. This is the report that is being loaded and you have the current fast cycle for. So October 15th to December 15th, the focus here is the previous year reporting. You do have the ability to separate out foreign and domestic, or you can do combined. So either way works. I'm just going to leave it as combined for this purpose. And then I'm going to hit export report to email. Right. All right. So what you'll get is an email will show up, well, obviously in your email, and then there's a link that's included in there. The easiest thing to do there is press save as, and then you can save it to anywhere you'd like to on your site, and then open it. One of the changes, just for folks who are aware, I may have done this in the past. Sometimes when this had come across before, at one point it was a CSV file, and another point it was an XML file. It is coming across as an XLSX file, so it is coming across as an Excel file. So just as a clarification for folks. So this is what that file would look like. You'd say there are 4 pieces to it: the instructions, the fleet, your vehicles, and then fuel. So all that information is there. During the session we had on Tuesday, somebody asked the question, hey, I'm looking for my vehicle miles traveled and I'm looking for my fuel use in one place. This would be one place to get that. One of the key elements, just for awareness, and people I think get tripped up on this sometimes, is this is not intended as an inventory report. So if you're trying to use this to manage your fleet from an inventory perspective, that's not what it's for. It is a snapshot in time. It is the aggregate of all the information at the end of the year. There are vehicles that are going to show up in here that are disposed of, which is important because FAST does track disposals, it tracks acquisitions, it tracks all of that. So we, as part of this, aggregate all of this information. So even if the vehicle left your fleet in January, you're still going to get that 3.5 months of data included in the report, but it would also show that the vehicle was disposed of. Okay. Okay. All right. So I'm at this point going to turn it over to Michelle, and Michelle can show you what to do with that file once you get it.
Okay, hi everybody. Again, my name is Michelle Kirby, and I'm the FAST help desk for all the headquarters administrators. So I work with all the folks at headquarters, get them trained up so that they can assist you. If you have a question as to who your agency headquarters point of contact for FAST, right here on the login screen, help agency points of contact. And then you can scroll down and find your specific agency and who your contact is. Please do not send a message to GSA because they will not be able to help you with this. You do need to be FAST user, and if you don't have an account, you need to contact your agency headquarters administrators because they are the only ones who can help you get an account if you need one. So from the FAST login screen, the email address is fastweb, one word, .inl.gov/sandbox. And this is a duplicate of the production FAST system. This is where we do all of our training so that we don't affect actual production information that goes up the pike. So I'm going to show you a couple of things. We're going to do the VLD upload first. In order to have access to this, you need to be either a Y-level user or have your agency administrator assign you as a Y-level user in the sandbox. So you click VLD, then the VLD reporting tools come up. And if you're uploading code rather than an Excel spreadsheet, import XML, the GSA information will always come to you as an Excel file. So hang on, I have to change agencies. I'm going to use NARA for my example. So import Excel. Then depending on your browser, you'll either see choose file or browse. You click choose file. Then you go to wherever you've saved your file. So in this case, Fast Current 2024. And you click on it. Once you do that, you'll see that the name of the file appears right next to the choose file or browse button. While you're working out any bugs, please leave the only validate do not load box checked. And you'll be able to validate your information without actually loading it. And then make sure the data set is on vehicles for your year-end data and simply click upload. FAST will then present you either a Excel validation failure with items that you need to correct. These schema validations are for required items that are missing. You must have the ESA designation for each vehicle. You have to have the assignment type. Is it assigned to a pool vehicle that anybody at the organization can check out? Is it assigned to an office for use by limited number of people? Is it assigned to an individual? Or if you share across agencies, it would be shared. But that literally has to be across agencies, not within bureaus or organizations within the same agency. So you have the ability to download a diagnostic sheet that lists everything at one time so that you can go make the corrections needed offline in your spreadsheet. I really encourage you, every time you have to make a change in that Excel file, highlight what you have to correct. If it's something that is tied specifically to the vehicle, year, make, model, GVWR, things like that, you need to work with your FSR to get the information updated. If it's other information, such as all of these that are shown here, highlight it in that spreadsheet and then go to your upstream system. You can pull down customer-driven data report for your entire fleet and then go online and make these changes once. The next year, you won't see all of these errors because you already resolved them. The only ones that you would see would be for any new vehicles that you receive. So that's the process, and you just keep repeating it till you get everything cleaned up. Couple of things. Everybody who is loading data in FAST has anything to do with data, year-end data in FAST, under either the VLD or the Help tab, click on the VLD resources. And under the reference documents, I don't care if you have it as a hard copy or save it electronically, you need to pull down a copy of the reporting reference. We spent a lot of time and effort combining this into a single document this year, so you no longer have to go to 2 places. And there's a lot of good information leading into this that you will need to find. Contact information, if you need to get a hold of somebody. If you get an oops error message or some other message like that, not just a flagging validation, you can send that copy of a screenshot to the fastsupport@inl.gov along with exactly what you were doing when you got that note. Always copy your headquarters fleet manager. You can also access your agency's help desk here as well. There's a lot of good things. There's a glossary of terms, frequently asked questions that are broken out into several different categories. If you need to know why you have to do this, under underlying requirements, these are all the laws, executive orders, and mandates that the federal fleet has to meet. And by doing their data in FAST, they are meeting these requirements. So again, primary point of contact for everyone is the headquarters fleet managers. Headquarters fleet managers, if you have questions, please reach out to us at fastsupport@inl.gov. And one of us, usually me, will probably be getting back to you as quickly as we can. Okay. Are there any questions? All right, George, I'm going to stop sharing and it's back to you.
All right, Michelle, there was a question again, and maybe you can kind of walk through this real quick. We showed the kind of the downloading of the spreadsheet, making, and I mean, anybody can make a correction in there and re-upload it. Could you just kind of walk through that, kind of how you upload again?
Yep. Okay. So again, you go to VLD, import Excel, then click choose file or browse. This will take you to where you can go find wherever you've saved the file on your computer. You click on the file, hit open. Only validate remains checked while you're validating. Data set is vehicles, and you click upload. And you can go through that process as many times as you need to.
All right, thank you very much. And so in addition to that, within the GSA Fleet.gov system, and we'll talk about customer-driven data here at the end, there is a tool in there that allows you to upload the file and get a number of the checks. It is not a perfect replacement for the sandbox, but in terms of kind of quick checks for certain items that you can just potentially make the corrections or see what you need to do, there is a tool within GSA Fleet.gov that gives you some elements of what the sandbox can provide as well.
Yeah. What scenarios would cause GSA leased vehicle to appear on the vehicles tab but not have any entries on the fuel tab? If you have, for example, a gas plug-in hybrid and you only used gas in that vehicle, you would get a flag because there's not a line item for the electricity. It could also be a vehicle that was acquired at the very end of the fiscal year, and there was no fuel transactional record for that vehicle. In a case like that, if you have the vehicle, you have to have fuel. If you have fuel, you have to have a vehicle. So you would go to the fuel tab and simply enter a fuel row for that vehicle using the VIN, and just fill that in, and you would put 0 for the information consumed, 0 for the cost, because you had the vehicle, so you have to have that fuels transaction. That's the most common one that I see.
Yeah, and the question coming from Glenn Mellon on that, definitely I would suggest reaching out to, if Michelle's explanation kind of covers what you're looking at, great. If you have any additional questions about it, feel free to reach out to us at fleet.operations@gsa.gov. There can be other variations in here. It could be that maybe your fuel is, you have agency-owned fuel sites, and so maybe it's possible that the information didn't pass across the way that it was supposed to. So there could be a variety of different explanations there. So if hey, the vehicle arrived on September 27th, but I didn't buy fuel during that time, explanation doesn't apply in your circumstance, feel free to reach out and we'll work with you on that one. Question came in from Greg Smith. I'm getting flags for vehicles that had acquisition dates for FY23 reports, but the flags say the dates were not on the report. Reached out to gsafleet.gov, didn't get a response. So I'm sorry, I haven't seen that one come across yet. We can definitely take a look. Feel free again to reach out to fleet.operations@gsafleet.gov. There are a couple potential reasons for that. And one of them I'm going to get into here in just a second. So in terms of VIN grouping and how that potentially could impact that. So we'll see if that explains some of what you're looking at. But yeah, without looking at specific files to see that, we may not have an answer quite yet. All right. See if there's any other questions. All right, I see a comment from Terry Evans. I only see an admin tool screen. If you could kind of respond back, are you talking about within the FAST website, or if you're talking about within the gsafleet.gov site? So, and then we'll try and get back to you on that question. Okay. All right, I see some folks are answering some other questions that are in here. So let's keep going and see what we have.
Yeah, there's a question on there. Hopefully the new system will carry corrections over to the next year. They will carry corrections over if you use customer-driven data to update the upstream system. If you just do it in FAST, FAST does not push data back up to GSA because that's the agency's data. So you need to take that information and from your upload file, make sure that gets updated in the customer-driven data. And then when your 25 report rolls around, that information will be there.
All right. Michelle, I did see a question down at the end. Are we able to report GSA and agency-owned data on the same spreadsheet?
Absolutely. Don't leave any rows between the two sets of data, though, or you'll have a problem.
Right. All right, Michelle, I'm going to go ahead and steal the screen back.
Yep.
All right. So one of the things I mentioned was regarding why you might see slightly different one year to the next, in particular when it pertains to acquisition dates. So one of the concerns, one of the complaints that has come across had been that you would see the same VIN being reported within an agency potentially multiple times. That would typically happen on the leasing side where you have a vehicle, you turn it in, and then it gets reassigned. Maybe it gets transferred within your agency. So you could have a couple different variations like that. So one of the things that we have available this year is when you download the information at the agency level, it's going to have the vehicle appear one time. So basically what it will do is it will aggregate within the existence of the agency. So Department of Homeland Security, you're pulling it at that level. Doesn't matter if the vehicle was a customer border protection or over at ICE. All of that data is going to be reported and it'll show as once. So if Customs and Border Protection turned the vehicle in, which would qualify as a disposal, and then ICE picks it up, counts as an acquisition for them. If you just pull the information at the DHS level, you would only see the one record and it would be within DHS the entire time. So I'll show you an example here in just a second, but again, it can be really effective if you pull the information at the agency level and then potentially distribute it out to the field from there to have the corrections made and then pulled back in. But if the information is pulled at that local level, then you're going to have whatever happened for that local office. So if that local office in Oklahoma City uploads their file and they disposed of a vehicle and it was picked up by another one of your offices in Boston, then you're going to have both a disposal and an acquisition that's going to have to be reconciled to kind of resolve those pieces. So it's just the nature of the way the leasing side goes, where the vehicles are kind of coming in and out a little bit more frequently than potentially on the agency owned side. But there is that advantage to pulling that information at the agency level and then kind of working it from there, as opposed to pulling it locally and then aggregating up. So here, again, just kind of one example. If you pull it locally, what you're going to see, flip screens, you'll see that disposal. If the vehicle got turned in, if somebody else picked it up, you're going to see an acquisition. So even though the vehicle stayed within the agency, you're going to have multiple records of that VIN, one with an acquisition and one with a disposal. Mileage and expenses, again, you'll see what is collected within that initial office or within that initial bureau. And then when you add them together, ultimately it should all roll up. But again, just to make sure that everything aggregates cleanly, there's no double counting, things like that. Having that single record is really what's key. The example on the data pulling it at the agency level, when you pull it in, one record for that vehicle was with the agency the entire time. All of the mileage, the expenses, and all of those things aggregated, again, one time. Doesn't matter which bureau that it happened in. We did have a couple of crazy scenarios where the vehicle was with an agency, was turned in, went over to a completely different agency. That agency turned it in. It went back to the first agency. And then we had another example where that all occurred, but then it went back to the second agency again. So what we've been worked on, and people have questions like, well, why did the acquisition dates change? Why did the disposal dates change? It's like, well, in a situation where it's gone in and out of the agency, which dates do you choose? And so the way that we've approached it this year is to look at what was the earliest acquisition date for that agency and what was the latest disposal date. And then there's going to be potentially a little bit of overlap in certain places, but again, trying to balance how some of these vehicle transfers and joint basing and things like that can impact how a particular vehicle as a mobile asset is recorded on different reports. It is 100% very challenging. And we're constantly working to try and see if we can make that better. So we're looking forward to feedback to see if what the approach that we've taken this year helps with some of that. But again, we'll continue to work on this as we get into FY25 and moving forward. One of the issues that has popped, before I jump off on that one, one other thing that is related, let me pull this spreadsheet back up again as an example. So in the past, and what I'm focusing on here, and let me make this bigger. So one of the other changes was made this year, and I didn't highlight this on Tuesday, and that was a missed opportunity. We've changed how we've approached this column B, the VID field, which is the vehicle identification number field. In the past, when you saw that field, it had the agency bureau, agency dash bureau dash vehicle identification number. We've removed the agency and the bureau this year. So the VID is only going to include the VIN. So that is a change. That is something that we definitely heard from a bunch of agencies. Some people were trying to delete that piece altogether. Some people were doing other things in here, moving stuff around. So for the purpose for this year, that is a change where the VID is only going to include the vehicle identification number. It does not include the agency and the bureau numbers.
One quick note on that too, George, that ties to the data quality report that comes out to the agency headquarters administrators. Since our team is aware of those changes that have happened, they will take that into consideration during the compilation of the data quality scores.
All right. Okay, so negative mileage. So there are flags that do appear, and the reference that Michelle provided earlier has 127 pages of business rules to reference as you go field by field to see what the minimums, the maximums, and particular rules are. So one of the ones that popped up on a lot of people's validation reports was negative mileage. So how would a vehicle drive negative mileage? Well, the answer is unless somebody's rolling back the odometer, it didn't in fact drive negative mileage. However, if the mileage was reported incorrectly and either overreported one year or underreported, you can end up with massive swings. I mean, we saw some vehicles with 50 and 60,000 mile corrections, either because it was being reported incorrectly in Mileage Express. There were a handful of instances where Telematics wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. have obviously been working on that piece, but you could definitely end up with a situation with negative mileage, which also can result in a negative lease cost for the year. Because if you have a massive correction also results in a massive credit back to your agency, because you've been paying for that based on the mileage that you were reporting. And if it turns out a vehicle turn-in that that's not actually the correct mileage, then you're getting a credit back. So instead of reporting negative mileage, which is 100% something that FAST can't accept, what we did here was change the negative mileage to 0. Now, what that is also going to cause or not fix are other validation flags. So if you consumed fuel, then obviously you couldn't have driven 0 miles. You can't have a mile per gallon of effectively infinity or unreportable. So regardless of what we did, it was going to cause some type of a flag that needs to be reviewed. In this case, it was a matter of simply removing this piece of things, but you still need to be able to address the fuel consumption as well as why the mile per gallon was off. And it might just be that it simply wasn't there or that it was misreported. One of the places that you can go to look is you can go into gsafleet.gov, and you can now, one of the, I think the great pieces that's there, because you can see vehicle level information, is you can look at the mileage history. And you can see on a month-by-month basis how mileage was reported, what was reported, the method that was reported by. So if you're seeing that 0, but you're seeing fuel consumption, you do have a resource that you can go back to as a reference to say, okay, this is what happened. So when you're doing your data validation, you can mark in there as like mileage was over-reported and correction or whatever the case might be. Whether you make the update to the data in the system, some type of an estimate, or that's your explanation on the data side. Again, it doesn't remove all of the validation flags, but here's how GSA Fleet approached this particular one. Same thing exists on the lease cost. If it's negative, that also was changed to 0 as well. All right, fast vehicle type. So beginning in FY23, new vehicle acquisitions have all been run through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. They have an API that's set up that we can do checks for, or sorry, I'm jumping ahead one. So in terms of vehicle type, so the change that we made here was that in the past, we've used equipment code as the basis for the fast vehicle type. The equipment code went away as part of GSAFleet.gov and GSA, so we had to come up with an alternative. And so what we selected was the standard item number. Back at the beginning of October, we did send out a matrix to all of the agency fleet managers and the fast reporting POCs at the agency level that kind of walks through how that standard item number crosswalks to a fast vehicle type. I think we've nailed them all. I haven't gotten a report recently that we missed any, but if you do see something there, please obviously let us know and we'll verify whether or not there was an issue. One of the things that constantly comes up is, hey, this vehicle, in some cases it's GSA change data, which could be a correction that we're making the data more accurate, which in and of itself can create a validation flag. But as it pertains to the fast vehicle type, you can have vehicles within the same standard item or even under equipment code that could fall into 2 different vehicle weight categories. And so you could have a vehicle, the same model, that is both a light duty and a medium duty, depending on certain things. And I'll show you an example. You could have within the same standard item number from year to year changes in the GVWR, the gross vehicle weight rating for a vehicle, which can impact and say, hey, in 2020 it was this, but in 2024 it's this. Or different makes, again, within the same standard item number, the same kind of thing can occur. So what we've done in the system is use the lowest weight category possible for that standard item number as the baseline. But if the GVWR says, hey, this vehicle needs to go up, meaning, hey, it's not an 8,000 pound vehicle, as some others might be, it is an 8,600 pound vehicle. The system will automatically convert that fast vehicle type to a medium duty version of the vehicle type instead of the light duty. So we do take the GVWR into account when we're applying that fast vehicle type. So here are 2 examples. So example 1, standard item number 21, basically your 8-passenger van, 3 different models, different makes, different years, 2014, 27, 2021. Use the example of the 2014 Chevy G1300, GVWR 7,300 pounds, easy, it's a light duty passenger van. 2017, oh, now it's a G2300 is considered the 8-passenger van in that standard 21. But because the GVWR is 8,600 pounds, now it's a medium duty van. 2021 for Transit F-150, same thing. 8,550 GVWR, it's a medium duty van, not a light duty van. One of the ones, and we've given this example before, that caught people a little bit off guard, and I know, at least in one agency's case, impacted how they were viewing it in terms of whether or not they could actually acquire the vehicle, because its classification got bumped up, would be the Ford F-150 Lightning. So the Ford F-150 Lightning with the standard battery had a GVWR of 8,350 pounds, thus making it a light-duty pickup truck. However, if you got the option for the extended range battery, it adds weight to the vehicle. Now you're looking at 8,550 pounds. That's over the 8,500 pound threshold between light duty and medium duty. So the vehicle will actually upsize vehicle types to a medium duty pickup truck. So same make, same model year, but because the options change the configuration of the vehicle, it causes the weight, the GVWR to go up, which then changes the fast vehicle type. All right, ISO 141. I know this flag is popping up on a lot of people's systems. If you made the updates in customer-driven data in the past, where you've identified whether or not you were applying that, then the information is there. For FY24, Stephanie and her team were able to load up the ISO 141 yes or no effectively for those vehicles. You still need to make sure that you're double checking, does it apply to your agency, but at least it's determining and saying, hey, it's a low greenhouse gas vehicle. Now you need to take a look at it and make sure you determine whether or not it stays categorized as such. So we did load the information for FY24. We were not able to go back and do all of that for FY23 before. I don't know if we have access to the data or what we'll be able to do there. So I cannot make any promises for FY23 and before. We're working on some stuff with Ron and Michelle that we might be able to do as we get into FY25 after this cycle in terms of some updates to the system. But we'll need, again, definitely work in progress. I know that this is a frequent flag. This is looking at every agency that I've pulled data for. This is a constant flag that pulls up. We're working on it, but just know that for FY24, the information was populated. Telematics data. So Executive Order 14057 required the collection of data on telematics, but it does not actually require it make it mandatory until FY25. In FY23, GSA Fleet did not incorporate this data in the system, but for this year, we were able to incorporate it. So we did pre-populate all of your vehicles, all of your GSA leased vehicles with that information. There is that switchover that is happening kind of October 1st as to whether or not the agency was paying for the subscription versus incorporated. It'll change things a little bit going into next year as to whether or not, how exactly the usage is applied. But for the purpose of FY24 data, that information was in fact pre-populated. So what's it going to have? There's two fields, the A13 and the A14 fields. Telematics basically, does it have telematics, yes or no, or does the vehicle have a waiver for it? And then from a usage standpoint, is it not applicable? Is the data not there, which can differ for agency owned versus GSA leased, because GSA leased is actually capturing some elements, mileage at a minimum. And then there are some additional codes, which come back. All right, and hit all my notes down here. All right, so you're seeing that FILMTUX. So the F is vehicle fuel energy consumption, I is vehicle idling, L is the vehicle location, M is vehicle mileage, FS is safety related information, T is trip level information, U is vehicle utilization, and then the X is the vehicle maintenance information. But again, all of those codes are pre-populated, which is the key thing. Okay, so this is the part where I kind of got ahead of myself a little bit earlier. So in terms of the makes and models, since 2023, GSA has been running new acquisitions that are being loaded into the system through the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration's VIN decoder. So one of the things that does is help standardize vehicle model names. You are probably seeing slightly longer vehicle model names that existed in the past. GSA in its fleet management system was really restricted in the number of characters that could be loaded. So you ended up with a lot of very compressed names. In the new system, GSAFleet.gov, we have a little bit more room for model names. And so you are going to see a cleaner description of what that is. This covers about 95 to 97% of vehicles are actually able to go through that. Some of the medium and heavies at the largest end of the scale aren't there. Vehicles that are highly customized may not be in there, but our rough estimation is about 95 or so percent of the vehicles are there. The vehicles that are not, that are still purchased through GSA Fleet, our engineering team is actually creating make and model names for those that are loaded in the system. So there is a team within GSA Fleet that incorporates that. We do roll that into GSAFleet.gov. It does roll into your FAST data. So even if it didn't go through the NHTSA decoder and it's a new acquisition, there is a process for that. Okay, indirect costs. So I mentioned indirect costs at the beginning. So one of the things that we had hoped to complete this year was to include the indirect cost element within customer-driven data. Unfortunately, we were not able to do so. So that is something that your agency will have to update in the file that you download from GSAFleet.gov. The file that you get will have basically just zeros across the board. And 0 is not an acceptable answer for indirect cost. The range that's acceptable is I think $10 up to about $4,700. $468 is a number that GSA Office of Government-Wide Policy has put out there as kind of a rough estimate. But your indirect cost is capturing things like your management of the vehicles, if you have on-site maintenance facilities, and basically any additional costs that you're experiencing outside of what you're paying for, in our case, the leased vehicle, or direct costs associated. There is a Office of Government-Wide Policy FMR bulletin that it describes the indirect cost piece. If you've never seen that, we can definitely get the link for that and put that in the chat. But that we do get some questions about indirect cost. It can't be 0. It's got to be somewhere between $10 and $4,700. That's really up for your agency to decide. GSA Fleet doesn't have any input on the indirect cost piece.
There is a link to that FMR on the Fast Help tab for the indirect.
Thank you. This is one of those items that we do plan on incorporating and are hoping to incorporate as an enhancement for FY25 so that you can preload that information within the customer-driven data. Data quality scores, again, we're kind of running out of time. I want to make sure we get to any questions. I don't see too much in the Q&A at the moment. This is something we're working closely with agency fleet managers on. Again, 100%, we were not able to get to everything this year. We wanted to try and get to as much as we could. I think we hit a lot of the big items, but we couldn't get to everything. Working with Michelle, working with Ron, we're continuing to work through these pieces. We've provided them with as much information on the changes that we've made to the system as possible. So for their awareness, and Michelle mentioned it in terms of the change with the vehicle identification number, that actually changing it, removing the agency and the bureau. So the flags are still going to pop up that it's different from last year, but the explanation effectively is that GSA changed its data. And so from a scoring perspective, that gets treated a little bit differently. The understanding on like makes and models, your agency doesn't have any control over the make and model that GSA Fleet provides. So if GSA changes the description, there's nothing you could really do about it. There are certain pieces here that you do have control over. There are certain pieces that you don't. When you're talking about core vehicle data information, model name, fuel type, gross vehicle weight rating, for a GSA leased vehicle, that's not something that you can fix. Please reach out to your folks, reach out to their fleet service representative. They can review it. They can work on making those updates in the system because these are core data records, and we need to make sure that all of that information is processed correctly and flows through to where it needs to go. Again, going back to the previous point, that'll take effect for FY25. It'll fall under FY25 data. You would have to make any updates that are necessary in your file to upload it for FY24. Information that you do have control over, so all of your customer-driven data, is the law enforcement versus an emergency responder. Quick plug for that. It can't be both. You have to pick one. But all of those data elements can be updated in customer-driven data. You can download customized inventory reports to be able to see what's there. There's a bulk upload feature, which we'll talk about kind of real quickly here. So there's different ways to update that information. Again, it'll apply an update for FY25. You have to make it on the spreadsheet for the FY24 upload. Agency-owned fleets have a little bit more control. Not only do they have access to the customer-driven data, they also have the information about the vehicle core data. At the agency-owned level, you can make updates to make GVWR, fuel type. Those things are within your control because it's your fleet management information system to update. Customer-driven data. So again, what you see on the right-hand side, I'm sorry for the small font, if you ask for a copy of the presentation, it's a little bit easier to see. Or if you log into gsafleet.gov and pull up a VIN, you'll see this in your vehicle details. Customer-driven data, you're able to edit it. These are things like, again, law enforcement emergency response, the vehicle location, have to have a garage address, a garage zip code at a minimum. That's required. But we are definitely encouraging and really want you to provide your garage address, full garage address information for EV purposes, recalls, other reasons. So certain elements in here, here's your ISO 141, 701 designations, all these things you need to take a look at. And then here's the telematics piece down at the bottom. If you do the bulk upload, and there's some instructions here, which I'm not going to go through verbatim because it'll take too long. If you download a copy of your bulk upload template, you don't actually have to make any changes, but you can automatically just import it again, and it'll produce an error log, and it'll let you know if there are any of these key elements that you need to take a look at. So again, here's the description. I'm not going to go through it piece by piece, but as you're walking through it, you can definitely reference that. When you upload the file, it's going to give you a little box that tells you, hey, how am I doing in terms of processing records? And then you're going to get a pop-up on screen that says, hey, out of the records that you uploaded, we found 29 records that had some problems with it. You can download your error log, and that'll give you a brief description of what those items are. As you're getting to FY25, you can then pop in there to update those, but it also kind of gives you a head start on items that might get flagged by the FAST sandbox. So you can potentially make those changes even before you do your first upload there. Again, this is really tiny. I know people aren't going to be able to see this. If you ask for the slides, you can see it. But again, this is just kind of highlighting at the VIN level, here are specific errors that were found. And then down here, there's a last record that says, here's VIN, success. There were no issues with that record whatsoever. This is not a perfect replacement for the sandbox. I mentioned that before, but I'm going to mention it again. You may end up seeing an error pop up if you run it through the sandbox, but this should give you a good idea and should capture most of the items that you might see otherwise. All right, wrapping this piece up. So in terms of references, Michelle already showed it, but here's a direct link again to the data tools and the references on the FAST side. That new reporting reference is out there. I know they've already published their second update to it. There's a new October version that's there. So we didn't include a direct link to the document because it's a living document. It can always be updated. So go to the site to get the most recent version. And then there's also a link to the Federal Fleet Report data. So once it gets published, which is typically in that April-May timeframe by GSA's Office of Government-Wide Policy, you can see kind of what the information looks like. Hey, when I do all of this, what actually gets produced? Well, this is what gets produced. One of these elements is the Federal Fleet Report. And then just kind of last thing, I mentioned that there are a bunch of references or resources out there. FAST support team, Ron Stewart, Michelle Kirby, Tim Raxick. On our side, myself, Nicole Salinger, who is our FAST coordinator, unfortunately is on, from my perspective, she's on leave this week. Yay for her. As well as Carol Boros and Jonathan Henkes, your agency points of contact in terms of like indirect cost, in terms of those elements, like that's who you really need to reach out to. They've got the information. They've worked with Michelle before. They are the best source of resource if you're not quite sure what to do from your agency perspective. So again, lots of great resources there to help. So I'm going to look at the Q&A. I think we answered that one. Ron, Michelle, anything else you want to add while we see if there's any more questions from the audience?
Just a reminder, if you need access to FAST or the FAST sandbox, you do need to reach out to your agency headquarters administrators. Since we have oversight of the entire system and we have no way to verify whether or not you actually need access to the system, we will not add users to the system. So go to your agency points of contact, find out who your agency headquarters contact is, and touch base with them, and they can get you set up.
All right. And Greg, I do see, you're still waiting for an answer. So for going back to that acquisition question, we're going to need to talk about that offline. So if you can reach out to, here, I'll put it in here. Just reach out to us directly at fleetoperations@gsa.gov, and we'll kind of walk through, we can walk through your case specifically and see if we can figure out what the issue might be. How long to get slides after request has been made? I think yesterday I was able to get them out pretty much immediately after the call. So it's sort of just as those come in, we'll get them rolled out. So the slide deck is ready. We'll be able to get them out. I'm looking at people's kind of saying, hey, I'd like the copies of the slide in here. I don't have the emails popping up in here. So again, just reach out to fleet.operations@gsafleet.gov. We can send it. If you want a copy of the matrix with the SIN to vehicle type crosswalk, we can include that there as well. But again, yeah, let us know what we can do. Thank you, Tom. Yes, we hear you.
So I see that we do have 2 people that raised their hands in the participant window. I can try to let them unmute themselves, but I can't promise that it's going to work. It's hit and miss. So we will give Aurelia the option and see if she's able to actually come off mute and talk. All right. She may not be able to, or maybe she changed her mind. So let's give Thomas the option and see if anything happens there. All right. Well, I tried. This is the tricky thing with the unmuting people, with everybody being from different agencies, and it even varies from one organization within an agency to another on whether it works or not. But we did try.
Reach out to us individually if we couldn't get you unmuted, and we'll get you some help.
Thank you for that, Michelle. All right, everyone. George and Michelle, thank you so much for the great presentation. Jonathan, Ron, Carol, I think. I don't think there was anybody else helping with Q&A. If there was, thank you to you as well. A recording of this will be posted hopefully in a week, hopefully no more than 2 weeks. It does kind of vary based on the workload of our communications office. But as soon as that is available, it will be added to our desktop workshop page, which that link will be in the email that you'll get. I can't promise by the end of the day today, but by the end of the day tomorrow for sure, that'll also have that certificate, and then the link to where the recording will eventually be posted.
There's one additional question that came in real quick.
Sure.
Trying to submit the download in the sandbox, and I'm getting an error message. Excel file does not contain required worksheet acquisitions. You need to change the data handling from future to current. You need your vehicles download, not your projections. So just change that radio button on the Excel import screen, and that should take care of your problem.